I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, imagine hearing the words, "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty as charged, guilty of murder." Now imagine hearing those words, thinking you'll spend the rest of your life behind bars and knowing you are an innocent man. That's what happened to Gregory Oliver. He has an incredible story. He has gotten out of jail through his faith in God, his faith in Jesus, with the help of his loving wife, Bonnie, as well. Together, they both have incredible stories to tell about a criminal justice system that often is not just at all. In fact, Gregory, to this day, continues to work to clear his name. They have each written a book about the experience. One book is called Faithwalk, A Walk from Darkness to Light by Bonnie Oliver. And the other book is called Walking Free, From Bondage to Liberty by Gregory Oliver. Bonnie and Gregory, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us here.
My pleasure, my pleasure. I'll start by asking you a couple of questions, Gregory. I've been, reading your stories, reading your books, watching your videos, and it's just an incredible story. You were convicted of murder unjustly, a crime you did not commit. Tell me when that was and what you were accused of.
Yes, it was in 1985, and they initially accused my brother who had mental issues. Then they turned around and somehow collected me into the event to make me responsible. Mere presence, according to the law, nor even the flight thereof, allows you to be considered guilty of a crime. There are people who are always sometime in an area where a situation happened, and they are considered what they call bystanders, or people who happen to be at the presence at the time of an incident. They knew that I was innocent, but they knew that they had to convict me. And this was in 1985, June the 6th, 1985, that they arrested us. My brother had come home because he was at school in college. He was going to college to become an architect. Mm-hmm. But he had ended up and had a brain tumor. That's the reason they sent him home, to rest and relaxation, because he had a brain tumor that they had removed. I'm surprised that they let him out the hospital, but he ended up going to my mom's house, and there he ended up in a fire that caused him to end up with brain damage, affecting him terribly. And family members began to start seeing he started having outbursts and stuff like that, but nobody really could pin it to mental illness. And I think that the state said, hey, we're going to get two birds for one. Convict this man, put this man in prison. And the other thing was, which I didn't know until years down the road, that the head prosecutor was corrupt, and he was mad at my granddad because my granddad, trying to help, was telling, the prosecutor, George Peach, he said, hey, I'm the senator, so they answered the phone. He wouldn't have answered it if he hadn't said he was a senator. He answered the phone, and what George Peach did say, Mr. Harris, because you have done this, I'm going to make sure that your grandsons never see the light of day. And we both wound up with both life sentences without probation and parole, and a life. And then my brother got 15 more years for another crime that, they even tried to, they had me initially connected to that, but they eventually nollie processed it. That means to get rid of it. And the jury came back so confused because the two of us in the same trial, and convicted me of that as well. But the judge wiped it away because he knew that would cause a mistrial. But I just, it's sad that the state would go to such lengths to put me in prison and try to hold me accountable for another man's actions. And that's crazy.
It's awful. And, it's your worst nightmare to be convicted of something you didn't do. There is no worse feeling, I think, than being treated unjustly. And to be treated unjustly and sentenced to a living death sentence, as you put it, has, really, I'm sure, been almost impossible to get over, other than your faith in God and your faith in his love for you.
Right. It was God's love and his continuous promise that he made unto me. Years before that, he had told a stranger, had walked up to me, I believe, and this stranger say, you're going to go through many things. He said, but you're going to come out. And little did I know what he was talking about. I said, you got to be talking about somebody else. He said, no, I'm talking about you. And it wasn't long after that that the fire happened, my brother's situation happened, and I wound up in prison for his crime. And according to the law, a mentally ill person can't be held accountable for actions that he do. And my brother, one of my brothers saw the Hinckley case, and he saw Hinckley being released, and I think it brought a little hurt on him to see that the state used this case in the manner that they did to convict me and to convict my mentally ill brother, and he died in prison. Sadly to say.
Very sad. How long did you spend behind bars?
I spent 22 years and 5 days behind bars. And it took years of fighting and trying to get them to bring attention to this case, to look at it. Even to the day, they will not look at the merits because they know we have the merits that prove everything that we're saying and what we have built to show them that, look, this is what y'all done. And we have presented my case back to the governor. The governor intentionally was going to do something and look at this case about 5 or 6 months ago. And what happened was the parole board said, well, wait a minute. You got to wait 5 years and don't be in any trouble with the law. I said, well, I ain't been in trouble with the law in 14 years. What kind of sense do that make? But I got to wait 5 years to a policy. And so a policy trumps the law? I don't think so. The law is if you're innocent, you shouldn't be in prison anyway. I should have had to going through probation and parole because they have put me on what you call a living death sentence, a life without running wild with a life. So this was their way in trying to clean it up, I believe. And I think that the governor should say, look, let's get some judges together and let's right this wrong. It needs to be done.
Yeah. Now, this was in Alabama where you were convicted?
No, this was in Missouri.
Missouri. Okay.
Yeah. And Missouri loves to have the tendency to get up and sue for different things. I think they need to correct their own house before they go to fix somebody else's house. Yeah. That's something that's violent. I'm not mad at Missouri. I'm not bitter. I'm better. And I thank God that he has given me the peace to be able to overcome the hurt and the pain that they tried to throw and dump upon me.
How old were you when you were convicted, Greg?
I was actually 29. I'm 66 today.
Right.
Yes.
So you spent from your 20s all the way into your late 40s behind bars.
My late 40s, almost 50-some years old.
Yeah.
Finally released.
Yes. Now, Bonnie was instrumental in helping getting you freed?
Yes, she was. And I'm so thankful that she was in Missouri at the time. One Michigan woman happened to be there. I know she had been going from knowing her now. We've been married over 28 years. We have been, going through some of the things that she had went through. And just, it's horrific. I know she had to tell her story, but if it hadn't been for her being there, I'd probably still be in prison. I know God can use anybody or anything. He can use a donkey if he wants to. But, but God is so good that he made sure that our paths crossed. And that's how, the ball began to roll, that he began to unravel this lie that the state put against me.
Bonnie, tell us a little bit about how your path crossed with Greg's.
Well, my youngest son was a senior in high school, and I had a void in my life being a single mother. Mm-hmm. And my mother had encouraged me to do volunteer work. And I didn't want to, all I could think of was volunteer work would be, working in a hospital. Well, that's not my personality, And so one night I was watching television, flipping through the channels, and I saw an ad for Missouri Coalition for Literacy. And I, at the time, only had a 4th grade reading and writing ability. And I couldn't teach reading, I didn't think. But it just so happened that the man on television was teaching math. Well, that's my subject. And I could teach math, without any problem. And so anyway, I called and they said, well, we need people to teach reading. And I said, well, I'm a poor reader. And they said, if you can read at all, you can teach this. So I went through the training session, and at the end of the session, they had a list of about 60 centers that I could teach at. And when I'd go over this list, first I eliminated days I didn't want to work. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'd go over this list, and City Jail in St. Louis just kept jumping out at me. It was like it was, magnified. And and I went over it because I didn't want to go to city jail because I had been a victim of rape, incest, child molestation, and assault through my lifetime. And the last place I want to be is around a bunch of bad boys. So I went through the list again, and it jumped out at me again. And so I asked the director there, I said, do they have women at city jail? And they says, yes, they have a woman there now. And I says, well, that's where I'm supposed to go. And I knew I was supposed to go there. Right. And so the first day I got there, it was kind of eye-opening, to say the least. I walked in, and the first thing I passed was a holding cell full of about 20 men. They were naked, drunk, drugged up, that sort of thing. And they were all Black. Mm-hmm. And that was the first eye-opener that I had. And then when we went up to the classroom, which was taught on the 6th floor, all the men in the classroom were Black also. And I met him the first day. And I didn't like him at first, and the reason I didn't like him was because he was different than the guys. Okay. Most of the fellas there were my son's age, and he was older, and I knew he could make it on the street. I just knew he could make it on the street. And then I would walk in on conversations about Gregory and his brother. His brother was kept in the psych ward, which I found out they had one. And they kept him on Mellovril, antipsychotic drug, to keep him under control because he would go off in violent rages and get in fights. So they had to control him with drugs. Well, I walk in on these conversations about the Oliver brothers, and I found out that Ron had committed the crime and that Gregory was innocent. And I said, well, if Gregory is innocent, why is he here? Right. And they said, well, that's, it's the way the system is, and I said, well, how long has he been here? And they said, he's been here 2 years waiting trial for a crime he did not commit. And so anyway, then I started looking at him differently, knowing he was innocent, knowing he could make it on the street, that he was different than the other fellas that were there. Mm. And one night, now I was not a Christian at this time. Okay. He was praying that someone would come in and believe in his innocence. And that's what his prayer was. One night I come in and I had this unction, I guess you would call it, and that I had to say something to him, but I didn't know what I was going to say. And as it was, I was working with him with a problem. And I told him, I says, I have something to say to you, but I can't say it now. So I finished the problem. I got up, I looked at him, eyeball to eyeball, and I said, young man, you're special. You don't belong here. I want you to know I'm praying for you. Well, I didn't pray for him. I didn't pray at the time. I patted him on the shoulder. Tears flooded his eyes, and it was like a vacuum, sucked them back in, like so no one would see the telltale tears rolling down his cheeks. And I patted him on the shoulder and walked away to my rowdy bunch and said, I can't believe I did that to that man. Mm-hmm. That was what started our communication, was that boldness on my part. And I didn't know where the words were coming from. It was that sort of a situation. It was, and then from then on, I'd walk in more and I'd find out more and more about the case. And everyone at the jail knew he was innocent. Mm. And I said, if he's innocent, why is he here? And they said, and when he got convicted, I couldn't believe it. I was livid because they sent him away for the rest of his life. And I said, well, something's got to be done. And they said, oh, Bonnie, just let him filter through the system. I said, how long does that take? They said it could take up to 12 years. And I said, so you're willing to sacrifice 12 years of a man's life to filter through the system? Right. No, that's wrong. So I picked up the gauntlet and charged ahead, not knowing what I was doing and not having any money. But it was filling that void for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you touched on something that is very, very important here, and that is you didn't have money. I mean, no. People who don't have money are often deprived of justice because they don't get decent lawyers.
Right.
That's a basic injustice of the criminal justice system, don't you guys think?
Yes, it is. And one of the things I found that, justice is not, it should be for everyone, equal justice under the law. That's what the Constitution states.
Yeah.
Reason that we don't get equal justice under the law is because certain people choose to pick and choose. And we always look at Lady Justice that she have over her eyes, the blindfold.
Right.
Peeking. It's us that's peeking. And the thing that we have to realize is we got to stop peeking and choosing who we decide who go free, who don't. That's not what justice is. We had a situation where the AG, he told the judge, you don't have to worry about writing this situation here in a sense. And this was during my habeas corpus period of trying to get justice in that point of saying, look, write this wrong. This shouldn't have been done. And the judge even helped us get the evidence from St. Louis.
Yeah.
But what the AG did is he said, Judge, there's not a public outcry. A public outcry should have nothing to do with justice.
Right.
To bring that out. But it's crazy.
Exactly. And again, it's a person who's got a voice, somebody who's connected, somebody who's prominent, somebody who knows somebody at the newspaper. Those are the people who have a voice in the system. And that's why it's inherently unfair, no doubt. And prosecutors, it seems, are much more concerned about getting convictions than finding justice.
Yes.
Interesting you said about the prosecutor. I paid for attorneys since I've been out because I'm still fighting, like you said, to clear my name. And we sent our attorneys up to California to actually depose the prosecutor. One thing he claimed, he didn't remember the case. And so the lawyer said, wait, what do you mean you don't remember the case? Well, he come about and say, well, I read all the stuff and everything, but I don't remember the case. But he did happen to remember two things that was vitally important.
Yeah.
The fact that my brother was on a double dose of Millerel during trial. That's illegal. He should have been on any type of drug. And I'm sitting up there looking, like the normal person, and he's there like a zombie. And they said, well, we got to find him guilty. Might as well just get both of them. That's the way the jurors would work, not to mention jurors was stacked. So, so much evidence that we were able to bring out to show what the state done and how they got a conviction, which they should never have. And the prosecutor did. My wife told me that in his deposition, he said something, and it almost broke my heart. He said, he's glad I'm out.
Yeah.
Well, I'm out, but my name is not clear.
No.
Right.
Because
your sentence has been commuted, but you have not been pardoned.
Right. Or not even the fact that they vacated the sentence, which they just did for two individuals who were involved in a major case, the Malcolm X case. And the thing of it is there's no such thing. They use the excuse about, well, it's moot issue. And I did my legal study on moot issue. There's no such thing as moot issue in this day and time, because when you look at moot issue, it can't be moot according to the 13th Amendment. The Constitution clearly says that the Congress or anyone that's in official position has the right to right or wrong when they see it's wrong. They don't have to make a new law. I don't believe in making these new laws, which we see a lot of that going on in our judicial process. We need to deal with the laws on the books. If a person is innocent, he's innocent when you put him in, and he's innocent when you let him out. It don't matter. You can't keep playing this game that, to try to keep them buried in under the system so that you can keep your political agenda going.
Also, you think of the time when you were prosecuted and when you went through all this was the mid to late 80s.
Right.
There probably wasn't a worse time in the history of the criminal justice system for a young black man.
Yes.
You had people like Joe Biden calling young black men predators back then, right? And you had Clinton and all the rest of them as well, and Giuliani in New York arresting kids in Central Park. I mean, so it was a terrible time. I began my news career in '83, so I completely remember 1985, and it was not a good time to be a black man going against the criminal justice system.
No. And we're so thankful to be able to put the message out through your program and many others that we have spoken through. And I know I try to avoid using the racial situation a lot of times. People they say, oh, he's black and he's white and he's he's black justice and white justice. I mentioned that in the book.
Right.
Because one inmate who I also was innocent, and he was a white guy, and he was released, and he was awarded $4.5 million after he was released. Right. And he told me something that really touched my heart, in fact, and that's why I chose to write that in the book. He said, Greg, you might have to be willing to accept black justice. I said, what is that? But maybe he had a point. And I don't know, but I respect what he was saying, but there is no such thing as black and white justice. There's right or wrong justice.
Exactly. And a lot of the division, of course, is not being black or being white, but being a person of limited means.
Yes.
Because like I said, you won't necessarily get the best criminal defense attorney who will, they just know how to grease the system. Right. I mean, if you were an affluent white man, who was in college at the time you were accused of this crime, I guarantee you would have had a different path. Yes. And that's not me being racist and not you being racist. It's just a fact of life, because that was 1985. Yes. Maybe it's different now in 2022, but you're right. That's how it is. How did you finally get the governor to commute your sentence?
The governor commuted the sentence based on the fact that they were enjoying what Bonnie was saying.
I use humor.
She used humor to present the case to them. And I remember when the attorney's top counsel came in to meet with me, he said, Greg, you have some very good advocates. And he looked at me and he said, we're enjoying what she's doing. And I said, I'm glad you enjoyed it, but there's something else here in play. I need to be released. Right. And he said, yeah, we come, to see who we finna put on the street. And they were satisfied. And they put me on the street. And I've tried to do whatever is right. I'm not perfect, but I try to do what's right and to make life better, not only for me, but for other people. And that's what it's about. And I think too often we think that everybody that's sitting in those prisons belong there. Right. There's over 200,000, I believe, innocent people around our nation. There's 2 million locked in the system, but 200,000 of them is believed to be innocent. That's 10%. And that's what the Innocent Project used to say. Now they done whittled it down to almost 2%. I don't think so. It hasn't changed, because if you go and look up the statistics, you'll see that those beds are continually being filled. And they are, I say, how in the world can you have the same amount of prisoners this year as you had 10 years ago? So it's something at play here, something other than what we think. And I think that it's going to take us as a people in society to do something to make that change.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly there's a business of criminality where the cops want the overtime for making the arrests. The prosecutors want kudos for getting the prosecutions. It's a very, very tainted system. I have been, a news reporter now for about 40 years, so I've seen it up close and personal. I've seen people, treated horribly by judges who have absolutely no respect, very little respect for the person, very little respect for the law, and prosecutors who are downright corrupt. All of that exists. If people don't think that exists, they're living in la la land, or they've never had the misfortune of dealing with the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit what it was like trying to keep yourself from falling into a horribly dark place when you're locked up unjustly, where this is a process to clear your name that is taking decades, where you go from a young man to a middle-aged man, and with a sentence that'll, impact the rest of your life.
That living death sentence, when you think about it, it's not like they just gave a man 700 some years, probably deserve it. You kill a bunch of people, and then you get arrogant and be arrogant even with the judge, you deserve some things. But when you are not that, and you're given some type of sentence like that, I don't even know how you can keep your sanity. But it was the grace of God that gave me the peace that passed all understanding. And he began to utilize me to help other inmates that were about ready to give up, and I encouraged them, don't give up. I coined the word, don't give up, get up. It was just like our Lord did. He got up on the third day, he rose. And so you have to understand that you can't make it in those places, in the dark place, unless the grace of God or you got some support system or something to keep you going and to kind of keep before you some hope of some kind in you, because it is a dark place, very dark place. And there are people who are coming out, and we are now, Missouri has created a law to help. That's why I say I'm still against these new laws, because I think that, you shouldn't even put these young people in the system. They got a new law for what you call juveniles. If they committed heinous crimes, they kind of try to get them out the system because they don't feel that they had the mindset. Well, you got the prison system being used as a dumping ground for the mentally ill.
Right.
That happened because back in the 80s, like what you were saying, they got rid of the institutions. Some of them were bad and they needed to get rid of them.
Right.
You curse the darkness and don't light a candle, naturally, you don't put nothing in place. And that's what happened. They haven't put anything in place. We got so many false fixers in our society that we need to begin to start looking at these things and begin to change those false fixers and begin to get real people that want to deal with the situation and make the changes that need to be made. And that's why it gave me that hope that I was going to get out, do something, and use my life story to help other people to come through the madness that I had to come through.
You're absolutely doing that, and you have turned your life around. You've taken this darkness and turned it into light, just the way Bonnie describes in her book. Bonnie, let me just ask you before we drill down deeper into the book. So, what was it like for you to, be deprived of this man I'm sure you fell in love with over the course of this time? You couldn't have a normal relationship. You had bars between you. Tell me what it was like for you and how you did keep the faith.
Well, one of the things that I think needs to be mentioned was at that time when I first met Gregory, I was in a period of despair over the breakup of my marriage. So the thought of relationships, anything else, was not part of the picture at all. So between the letters and the visits with Gregory, there was something in him, okay, and that was healing to me. Our relation was not based on, gee, he's attractive, help him, that sort of thing. Our relationship was based on injustice befell this man. Something needed to be done. I felt that in my life, I was treated unjustly. And so by fighting his case, I was also fighting my case. But in the meantime, his prayer brought me in the jail. His prayer brought me into becoming a Christian. So our relationship was built on a mutual development, growth, learning about the Word of God, about each other, okay? So we didn't have this normal relationship. We had a relationship of healing, both of us. I was in a mental prison. He was in a physical prison. So our relationship was helping both of us to come out of our prisons and grow. And another thing is I'm pretty much of a loner. And I can be very reclusive. So aloneness did not scare me. It did not bother me. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
I was not, yeah. I was not bent on, I've got to have a man in my life.
Right.
That was the farthest thing from my mind after having a horrible divorce. My thing was, this is an injustice. Somebody needs to do something about it. And so I started working on his case. I had no money. I had no knowledge, at all. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what. But what was interesting was after 11 months of becoming a Christian, I had lost everything I owned, lost my job, everything else. and I'm sitting at Wheaton College in the master's program, competing with preachers' kids and missionaries' kids. I had no Bible background, okay? And I'm biblical law so that I could fight his case, you know. And it was just that's where I really grew, you know, and
Absolutely.
grew in the law.
Absolutely. Greg, tell me what it was like writing Walking Free, going through all of this.
You know, I believe, Mr. Logan, I believe everyone has a book within them. And when this situation happened in my life, that's exactly what happened. It was in me, and I always wanted to write. And I kept telling my wife, I say, "Hey, I'm writing a book," and I would tell other people, "I'm writing a book," and she would say, when are you gonna write it?" Well, I'm in the process of writing another book, and she said, "Well, you got to get that." I said, "Well, the book's in me," and so I to keep that motivation of letting you know it's in you, but you got to pin it down and put it on paper, and you have to bring it out that it's legible and it's expressive to people, that people can understand what you're trying to talk about, and they can feel you. And we had a lady when we went up to a book signing. Her name is Barb. Matter of fact, the same name as my wife's sister. And I want to mention that my wife's sister wrote a letter to the governor. It was key. She wrote a letter to the governor, and that's how that initiated for Bonnie fight to go. So I had two Michigan women that was actually fighting for my freedom. And I even tell every time I see Michigan women, I always tell them, I say, you women are warrior women. I like to think of that. But what motivated me to write Walking Free, it was in me. And I knew that I had to bring it out because I read other people's stories, testimony. And those was the things that kept me going, kept me motivated to be mindful of you got to stick around. You got to tell a story. God always keeps somebody to tell his story. We going up to Chicago next week to see a woman that's really important to our life. She told Bonnie, she said, "I see Greg walking out of prison. He's going to walk out on a Monday." June the 11th, 2007, I walked out of prison. It was a Monday. And I'm saying, God could not do it any better. But the thing of it was, her story, her keeping that word for years to tell me, I hadn't seen this woman. But when she said it, that lodged in my spirit, and it kept hope in me. And when I walked out of that prison on a Monday, I didn't forget it because I knew it was God Almighty. And I give him all praise, honor, and glory because, he said, I want your story to touch other people, to let them know that I'm real, that no matter what they're going through, no matter what struggles they have, that I can help them. I'm there for them. I never leave them nor forsake them. And that's what he done for me, and I know he can do it for them. And that's why I wanted to get the book out, to make sure other people's lives be touched.
Absolutely. It's very faith affirming. It's a wonderful book. It's an unbelievable ordeal that you went through. Bonnie, let me ask you about your book, what it was like writing Faithwalk, and why you decided to write a different book rather than writing a book together with Gregory.
Well, the primary part of my book, or most of the book, was written 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Okay. And it wasn't finished because Gregory was still in prison.
Right.
And the Lord put it on my heart to write it. So I did. And last year, a publishing company in New York City found my book, read it, called me and said, "This book is for today. Mm-hmm. Would you revise it and republish it?" And I said, yes, because it really wasn't finished because Gregory wasn't out of prison. And then I asked him, I said, Gregory is working on the sequel to my book, which tells his story in prison. I said, if we can get this finished, will you publish it too? And they said, yes, it would.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, there was no question I was led to write it. And I learned how to write and read much better during the whole process.
I think there are a lot of miracles unfolding here. I think, your education that came about during this time, learning about more, strengthening your language skills, strengthening your research skills, working as a volunteer, crossing paths with Gregory. All of these things are not random. It makes you realize faith gives you the knowledge to realize that, there's nothing really random, and that you guys were meant to meet each other, and it was divine intervention. And we appreciate you writing these two books that are very faith affirming. One is called Faithwalk, A Walk from Darkness to Light, is written by Bonnie Oliver. Like she said, it was decades in the making. It began with a man who was wrongfully convicted and unjustly jailed, and it ends with him seeing the light of day, getting out of jail in 2007, I believe it is.
Yes.
Walking Free from Bondage to Liberty by Gregory Oliver is his story about how he was a man who was deprived of his liberty for decades, yet he never gave up his faith. He never lost faith. It's an inspiring story. All of us face injustices of one type or another in our lives. Few follow or see such injustice as Gregory has, but I'm glad they documented all of this, and it's been delightful speaking to you here today on Spotlight.
Yes, and it's been a great pleasure talking to you, Mr. Logan. I think that too often, you know, like you said, this can help a lot of people out there. Yeah. Because especially in this day and time, we're seeing so many people that's hurting, and my heart cries out for a lot of the hurt that's in our society today. But if we make anything better, we should. Mm-hmm. That's what God would want us to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd love to have you back on the program. And I'll tell you when I want that to be. I want you back on the program when the governor of the state of Missouri apologizes to you.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
That's great. Thank you, sir.
Amen. God bless. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you guys also.